Blockchain to the rescue in third world countries, fighting Ebola with the military, and we explained the Emory shift all in our first episode of the brand new Team Policy Podcast. So real quick, who we are, what the podcast is, what it's about. First of all, I am Christian. We have Elijah and Steven. Say hi, guys.
How you doing?
Hey, you.
And Elijah, I think you have a quick note about yourself.
Okay, my name is Elijah the Bear, and I'm CEO, Creative Executive Officer of the TPP Multimedia Group. I'm the least qualified speaker at this roundtable, as I joined Debate Club little more than a month ago. Fun fact, I was born in Alaska, land of the grizzly bear, hence my nickname. I hope you enjoy our first broadcast.
My name is Stephen DeLoglis. I am from Richmond, Virginia. I've been in debate for 4 years now, going on to my 5th year. Throughout all that time, I have deeply found a passion for debate, and I've enjoyed deeply being part of this broadcast. And I hope and would love to share with you all the little nidbits and nuggets of gold that we can help you with this debate year.
Awesome. And my name is Christian Ray. I debate with Steven. And I guess this is my 4th or so year of debate, 5th year total, if you want to count my first year of public forum. And I love debate. And I love listening to different perspectives and ideas and breaking down case ideas and talking about sort of the theories behind them and all of that. So a quick tidbit about this podcast, what you can expect. This is not the episode you'll expect to hear every week or anything like that. This is a little bit more introductory, but you can expect this to be a team policy focused podcast. It's a podcast about team policy debate, about cases getting run in it, all that stuff, and it's by team policy debaters. So you can expect some coaching theoretically, but this is really designed to be a podcast by debaters for debaters.
It's peer-to-peer.
We know what you. What's that?
Peer-to-peer consulting, not top-down.
Right. Totally. So this is sort of a roundtable discussion themed thing. We want it to be very open and inviting. This is focused around STOA and CCFSE team policy resolutions and tournaments. So we're going to be talking to you about anything that we encounter at tournaments, things that people send in to us to the show. We are based out of the Southeast. Stephen is from Richmond. I'm from Charlotte. Elijah is from South Carolina. But we are nationally focused. So we're going to be getting information from hopefully people all over the country, maybe even some NCFCA folks. We might have them on at some point during the year and talking about NCFCA resolutions, cases, and just some of the interesting topics that are out there so we can all hopefully learn more along the way. Our goal with this is to create a fun and just discussion-focused environment where we can break down policy proposals, case ideas, things like that, and offer breakdowns of any case, any position, or political theory behind something. And we hope to provide valuable content in a convenient format, be it through a podcast, for team policy debaters at any level. So right now, I think it's Wednesday at about 4:30 in the afternoon that we're recording this, and we're going to be putting out episodes for this hopefully every Sunday around 2 o'clock, and hopefully making these available for you guys on a consistent, routine, week-by-week basis so that you have some updates on stuff. Now let's get started, but first, a quick word from Off the Edges. Off the Edges is a fantastic brand selling phone cases, waterproof laptop bags, anti-blue light glasses, and so much more. You can check them out at Off the Edges on Instagram or at offtheedges.com. I know for a fact those blue light glasses, which I'm wearing right now, are super helpful on long, late night researching for debate cases, things like that. They protect your eyes, and they really make it so much easier to be on a screen for those long hours when you really want to protect your eyes from that damaging blue light. So getting started in our first topic, blockchain and converting U.S. aid payments to cryptocurrency or theoretically some sort of alternative payment solution. Real quick, guys, I'm curious, what are your first impressions when you hear this case?
This case definitely, right off the bat, makes me want to cringe a little bit. The reason I want to cringe a little bit is because I don't know, because this has a way of, in my head, going either really, really bad, or this potentially being an extremely dangerous case. Dangerous for the negative teams because we'd all lose. But right off the bat, I feel like there's a lot of little tiny details. Like, this would be one of those debate rounds where instead of arguing human lives are dying or little kids in Africa might be starving, you're arguing the little per capita financial details. And under that, I just don't think that converting all of our financial U.S. aid payments to cryptocurrency, whether it be Bitcoin or whatever kind they would pick, would be a good idea, considering that Bitcoin has been plummeting in the market so badly lately. So would that mean that all of our aid that we give to foreign countries, instead of being backed up to the US dollar, would all of a sudden just plummet one day because we're confined to only using Bitcoin? And then on top of that, there's a point where Bitcoin is widely known to be used by criminals as payments because for the most part it is untraceable. And then we're giving that to foreign countries which are already known for abusing the US aid that we give to them and for helping corrupt regimes. So I don't know, I just think there's a lot of issues that come with this.
Definitely. Elijah, what are your initial thoughts before we dive deep inside it?
So when I was told about this case, my first thought was, what? And my second thought was, I think that somebody would probably have just made up this case because they were a fan of cryptocurrency and they knew a bunch of things about cryptocurrency and they just wanted to write a case about cryptocurrency. That's what I thought. That may or may not be true, but I was thinking, like, where is this coming from? Like, where does this idea come from? Because it's not obvious why you would want to change our payments to blockchain.
Right. Interesting. Okay. My first impressions when I heard about this case were kind of somewhere in between both of you guys. I was kind of thinking, okay, I don't know, a lot of details of this, but first of all, how are people going to do this? What are we specifically going to do? Does this mean, okay, we use Bitcoin or Tether or Ethereum? What specifically do we do with this? And why? Why are we doing this? What is the point? Is it because it saves money? Because there's a lot of transaction fees with cryptocurrency. So I could see immediately how there'd be problems with that. Is it because it's safer or more secure? I don't know. It seems very interesting, and it raises a lot of questions for me. So going into the background of this case just a little bit, there's some key premises in the case. I think there are different versions of this case out there. So anyone preparing to run against it, don't just go off this. This is just one case variation we've encountered. But the case premises were, first of all, that corruption is not being fixed in other countries, that corruption must be monitored in order to be stopped, that corruption hurts the population of countries and the members within society of that country, and just going off that, really, that leads to violence, it undermines a country's integrity, and so forth. And then they claimed that blockchain technology allows us to make aid payments more transparent, and that by making those aid payments with blockchain, or by making them more transparent, promoting transparency, we will reduce the corruption and make it harder for them to steal aid money, them being corrupt politicians, presumably. And there are several questions that I would raise towards this case if I encountered it. First of all, for the affirmative team, what is blockchain? Make them define blockchain, because when they say blockchain, that's a very vague statement, and there's not a lot of details there in terms of what that actually encompasses. So blockchain really is just the idea behind cryptocurrency. It's the model for it, the idea of using a ledger system. It is not, however, a specific cryptocurrency or a specific platform. So how do they define it? What does that mean? We don't know. Second thing is, how are they going to use blockchain? Are they going to use Bitcoin, Ethereum, Tether? What coin are they going to use, or system? Are they going to invent one or use an open source one? The next thing is, who's going to control these ledger accounts? Because I think the important thing to take into account is when you think of making aid payments currently, you think of a lot of bank transfer, treasury documents, paperwork. But when you're dealing with things like blockchain or cryptocurrency, all it takes is a touch of a button to instantly move $1 billion. So who's going to control that? How is that really going to be more transparent or more accountable than this massive paper trail you have with the existing system? There's no paper trail with cryptocurrency. There could be some sort of system of open ledger accounts where you can see where money was moved around. You can't see any personal details with cryptocurrency typically, but you can see like what accounts or wallets it was moved to. So who's going to control these accounts and make sure that someone doesn't just decide to steal $1 billion? Next, how are you going to ensure that the money is not stolen or diverted? I think that's a really important question, because whenever, again, you only have one person controlling this, or maybe a group of people, an organization controlling it, but ultimately all it takes is one person with the password, theoretically, to go in there and use the account credentials to divert millions of dollars. So how are you going to make sure something does not go wrong? And then if it does, if money is stolen, what happens next? That could be money stolen on the American end, where someone just steals $1 million, or that could be on another country's end. Okay, they get the transfer, and then someone within their government steals it. They divert the money within their wallets from whatever their recipient account is to another one. What do you do then? Do you cut off aid? Do you send them more aid? Do you investigate it? What happens? And is there a way to recover stolen money with this? One of the big problems with Bitcoin is that you can't recover your money if you lose your account credentials. So you have like a public account information piece of information, and then you have a private password or a code, basically. I forget the terminology, but with cryptocurrency, that's typically how it works. You have two things, a public and a private key. And if you lose one of those, or if you lose a backup key or formula which allows you to unlock it, then you can't get that money back. You can't get that account back. So what do we do if we just lose the money? How do we recover it?
So if I have $10,000 in a Bitcoin wallet and then I forget my password and then I come back, there's no like forgot password link or anything. It's totally gone. It's just off, inaccessible.
Right, and there are theoretically some ways to combat that by using cloud-based solutions or online solutions which store the key pieces of information you need for you and make sure that there's a plethora of backups of those files, and then only requiring that for you to use them, you insert some sort of passcode to that account, which you can fix or replace or something. But there's just a lot of questions with this platform. And also, how much of this aid are they actually diverting to blockchain? What about food aid? Are we going to say that all aid has to be a form of monetary aid, and that all monetary aid has to use the blockchain? Will it be a pilot program? How does it work specifically? And what are they going to specifically accomplish that they can fiat? Because a lot of this seems like something, okay, we're going to work towards this. It's a goal, but it's not something that they can make happen. So there's a lot of details in there that we don't know, we don't see, that we really need to know before we can make a firm decision on whether or not that's a good case.
Yeah.
And
it's really good, Christian.
And then going down lastly to two key problems with the case is that blockchain doesn't mean anything on its own. It's just a ledger system. The definition of blockchain from Google is a digital ledger in which transactions made in Bitcoin or another cryptocurrency are recorded chronologically and publicly. In other words, blockchain doesn't mean anything until you pair that with some cryptocurrency or platform that's pre-existing, that you can demonstrate how it's going to work and do things differently. If they cannot do that, if they cannot link this to a specific platform, then we don't know what we're voting on at all. And it makes it almost impossible to debate against. Every cryptocurrency is different. So they can't just say, we're going to pick a cryptocurrency, or they can't just say Bitcoin, because they have to nail it down specifically to something. They could say Bitcoin, but they can't just say, oh, well, something like Bitcoin. That's really the issue. And then the second thing is there's nothing stopping people from laundering money that they can show with existing platforms, unless they can show some new platform that has all these security mechanisms that could be used by some sort of central authority, like a bank or government. Then we have nothing demonstrated that shows how they can actually prevent problems from occurring. Anyway, that is the blockchain case. Do you guys have any other thoughts or comments on it? Those were just sort of my review on it.
Not personally, just the idea that if we keep using aid in the form of cash, every single problem you just brought up would be completely solved for. Although likely they can still launder it, they can still spend it on stuff that it wasn't designated for. We at least physically give them the cash, and then the cash dollars have the tracking numbers built into them, which is even another way that we can keep tracking the money. Whereas Bitcoin, as you just mentioned, it's not 100% transparent.
Right. Although even to that point, I think they would say that if they're using it for illicit means, the people they're spending the money on are probably not going to count and report the numbers of the dollar bills. So
Right.
it'd be hard to, or if we used a wire transfer, for example, you couldn't do that. So there's a lot of problems in the status quo, which I think are probably true. But to show how we're going to solve that with cryptocurrency is very challenging. And I think they really need to get specific with what they're going to do, or else the case just can't work.
Right.
I'm wondering, so cryptocurrency is used as a currency, but it's not like widespread use. Like you can't go to the supermarket and hand them
Bitcoin.
a hundredth of a Bitcoin to get some lettuce. Like, so we'd have to send it to them electronically, but then to other countries, and then they'd have to liquidate it into cash or something. And that's when the corruption would happen. Like,
that's true.
it doesn't seem like
true.
It cuts out too much chance for corruption.
Right. It's really just another means of sending the money, and that's a very valid point. I didn't even think about that. That we're still sending the money that one way or another has to be converted into cash. So it's the same thing as sending them cash, but then you just add another step in between so that electronically there is, in theory, a paper trail. But the way cryptocurrency works, depending on the coin, it varies largely from coin to coin. There may not be a paper trail or digital paper trail at all. There are some coins that are completely anonymous and you have no record whatsoever of them that would still sometimes get lumped into the term blockchain. So a lot of vagueness there.
Hey, Christian, under that, did the flow of this case that you got mention anything that every single country in the entire world that the U.S. gives aid to currently has the technology to convert whatever form of cryptocurrency into their financial ledger?
I didn't specifically touch on that, but I think the issue is the whole thing with cryptocurrency, in theory, is that there's no central authority over it. So it's a decentralized thing. There are some coins that are centralized, which sort of go against that whole mantra, but cryptocurrency largely is something that is run in an open source community that's mined by people. So there's no set of servers or something to run the network. It's just run by people within the community that use it or like it or promote it. So as a result, the technology is available anywhere you have an internet connection, really. There's no one regulating it. But then that raises another issue. If there's no one regulating it, do we really want to give government money to an unregulated, uncontrollable platform that is presumably unstable? Because as we've seen with a lot of cryptocurrency platforms, they come and go. Some of them crash. Some of them just shut down. Some of them are just very unreliable, like Bitcoin, which a year ago around this time was nearly $20,000 a coin, and right now is about $3,000 a coin. So there's a lot of unpredictability there and unreliability in terms of transaction fees and long-term support from the community of miners or developers behind the platform.
Christian, Can you explain how Bitcoin is mined? Like, where does it actually come from? What gives it
Right.
subsistence
So
as a
that's
coin?
one thing I'll without going too deep into
Yeah, just
cryptocurrency, I'll
in a
try to touch on
nutshell.
this. In a nutshell, Bitcoin, it has no central authority. It is a software that is developed by a group of developers and maintained by a sort of anonymous community. And people download and use that software. They use the wallet for Bitcoin, all the stuff that goes with that. And then the way new Bitcoin is created, and the way transactions are processed between people's wallets, which are backed up on these open source computers that are run by the community called ledgers. The way it works is people donate their computing power. It used to be just grandma's desktop in the corner. Now they're dedicated computers, usually in farms, server farms called ASICs, or there's an abbreviation for that, but it's basically dedicated computers designed to mine Bitcoin. And they spend a lot of processing power and electricity just running the network, running these algorithms over and over again, which check the network for processing. And whenever over time the miners process that information, like transactions, they get rewards they solve blocks basically within the blockchain, hence the name blockchain, and they receive a reward for it. And that is how new Bitcoin are brought into the sort of environment, and those miners then get that Bitcoin sent to their wallet, and then they can then transfer Bitcoin on the network as well.
So, to be clear, a Bitcoin represents the computer power needed to solve an algorithmic problem for like a company in China.
No, so the way you sorry, I know that was a very complicated example, but the way you send Bitcoin, you send it on the network, uh, and you pay a transaction fee, and then that every time people send Bitcoin on the network, it creates a new block on the network, basically,
Ah,
and
I see.
all the computers in the world rush to solve the block as quickly as possible, and whoever solves it first, theoretically, within a pool of computers or within an individual computer, gets a reward for solving that block, and that reward is like 25 Bitcoins or something like that. They're then distributed among that group of people for solving it and powering the network, basically. So there's a lot of people just contributing their computing power to processing stuff within the network, which poses a problem for things like Bitcoin because it's become very inefficient. But that's a whole nother issue.
That's
Bitcoin's a very complicated thing, which is frankly even hard for me to explain or sometimes understand. So it requires a lot of digging outside of this, but it's very interesting.
so you're rewarded with a bunch of ones and zeros for helping transfer ones and zeros from one person to another.
Something like that. So it's a little bit more complicated, but that's the gist of it.
Okay.
Awesome. All right. So moving down to the next topic, I think we've sort of talked about the blockchain enough for now. This is an interesting case dealing with Ebola outbreaks in the Congo. Stephen, would you like to take it away on this one?
I would love to take it away on this one. So this is a case that I personally haven't run up against, but I am dreading the day that I have to run up against it because it has potential to be a very successful case. So background, currently the Republic of Congo is experiencing, according to the World Health Organization, the second worst Ebola outbreak in the documented history of Ebola. And on top of that, to make matters even worse, there's also multiple, I want to call them like tribal wars or civil wars going on in Congo. That's just helping the Ebola spread even faster and making conditions quite dangerous in the Republic of Congo. And then recently, the U.S. Department of State ruled that the conditions in Congo, due to the war and all the violence, are too dangerous to keep the Center for Disease Control (CDC) workers in Congo. So they pulled out all workers from the grounds of Congo. And this is where Susan Scotty wrote, in the CNN reporter, she wrote in 2018, she said, "The current epidemic in the Democratic Republic of Congo, with 426 total cases, including 245 deaths, is now the second largest and second deadliest in history, according to Thursday's report from the nation's Ministry of Health. So this is where the case happens. The affirmative team, there might be different versions of this, but the affirmative team that we heard of proposed two things. The first mandate that they proposed was that they would send 3,000 soldiers into the Congo to help control the war and make it more peaceful, which would then allow the CDC workers to be able to go back into the Congo. But a few reasons under this that just keep in mind. They didn't give any reasoning for why 3,000 soldiers would be the best number. They didn't say why it's better than 1,000 or why it's better than 20,000 soldiers. They said 3,000 soldiers, which I'm assuming they might have two-way evidence, or they just decided 3,000 was a nice round number. And the second one is, you know that
We
in
love them
history,
nice
it's always,
round numbers.
you know, in history, it's always been very successful when the U.S. just sends their soldiers into other countries to try to solve problems.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
because Vietnam, North Korea, all these
Iraq,
places are really peaceful now.
Iran, Afghanistan.
Yeah. Afghanistan,
Syria.
Pakistan.
The list goes on. We are an amazing military.
Yeah, I mean, it always works. No problem. Totally.
And then their second mandate after 3,000 soldiers would be sent in is that they would, I don't remember the exact wording they used, but basically they would lift the ban and allow CDC workers to go back to Congo and fight the Ebola epidemic, which first of all I think is just a dangerous idea to allow American citizens to be exposed to the epidemic, but that's not under the arguments. There's a couple arguments that we have against this case. There's quite a few, but these are just a few good ones that I found in a bit of research I've done. Most of them fall under inherency and solvency. But the first argument is the U.S. did not permanently pull out of Congo. I repeat, the U.S. did not permanently pull out of Congo. So basically what the CDC did was they didn't leave Congo for good. What they did was they said that the current conditions in the Republic of Congo are too dangerous to keep the CDC workers, but eventually, once the conditions become either more peaceful or less dangerous, they'll be more than happy to lift the restrictions and allow the workers to go back and do their stuff. But currently, it's too dangerous. James Keaton wrote on December 3rd of this month, actually, or year, actually. He wrote that the violence by rebel groups has complicated efforts to battle what is now the second deadliest Ebola outbreak. The CDC, which is twice as large as the World Health Organization, has said its staff would return to the epidemic once the area is safe. Just to show that the first inherency argument, that we're not permanently pulled out of there. If we just wait in the status quo when the Ebola epidemic is solved for, we would already return and help them.
Or it sounds like even the military, or sorry, not the military, but the violence issues, it sounds like that's really more what they're going after, because they would be there, I would assume, for health purposes. So
Right.
That's not what caused them to leave. It's probably the violence.
Yeah. That's a good point. Thank you for bringing that up. And lastly, that even has an advantage or two, if you just side note, if you think about it, because we're not exposing our own citizens to Ebola. But that's the first inherency argument, and I believe that would be a pretty significant argument against it. And I haven't heard a team run that yet. But the second argument would fall under significance, or, I don't know, arguably inherency. You could probably go both ways with it. But it's that the World Health Organization says that the U.S. is not needed to fight Ebola outbreak. I repeat, the World Health Organization says that the U.S. is not needed to fight Ebola outbreak. On December 3rd of this year, the World Health Organization, which is currently between the World Health Organization and the UN, seem to be the two leaders on fighting the Ebola epidemic, although multiple other World Health Organizations and governments of other countries have already stepped in to try to help solve this problem, so you wonder why the U.S. is extremely needed. But the World Health Organization said that we're not needed. This is by James Keaton in December of this month also. He said, the head of the World Health Organization said Monday it can fight the deadly Ebola outbreak in Congo despite the withdrawal of the U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention, insisting we can cover it. The comment by the WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus came in a wake of commentaries in 2 medical journals appealing to the CDC to return to the epidemic zone in Congo, saying its expertise is needed. And in the case that I personally got to sit in and listen to, their one main advocacy card was, I'm assuming from one of these 2 journals, saying that although all these other countries are already fighting the problem, the U.S. expertise are needed to actually solve for the problem. So this is why I was so excited when I saw that the World Health Organization itself is saying we don't even need the U.S. to keenly fight the problem.
Now, did the
Right.
WHO say that they don't need the US's help overall or specifically Congo?
Specifically Congo.
Oh,
This
okay.
is talking about the Congo epidemic with Ebola.
I think what the article might have been touching on might have been something like, basically, we don't need more help in this situation, and therefore, just logically bouncing off that, the U.S. isn't really needed. And there, did they specifically say the U.S. is not needed, or just that help in general is no longer needed?
The U.S. help specifically,
Oh,
because
wow.
they're responding to 2 journals in medical journals saying that the U.S. is vitally needed to be able to solve for this outbreak, and they were specifically responding to those 2 journals saying that the U.S. actually isn't needed because they have it covered.
Oh, wow. And then touching on that a little bit, is the important issue of solvency. So even if we did go in to the Congo, an interesting thing I found was that the president or the head of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, who I believe is, I might be mistaken on this, but I would assume is a dictator. I believe I read some stuff about that.
He
But
basically is like he's basically delayed elections since his terms ended, and
right, so not the
most democratic kind of guy.
right, not the nicest guy. He came out and said, interestingly enough, something to the extent of, "We won't accept any aid from the United States or from other countries." I don't think he specifically said the United States, but he was talking about in response to how other countries were actually trying to help with this epidemic. The United Nations set up this sort of emergency summit with 17 countries, and the only one of the 17 countries invited that did not attend was the Democratic Republic of the Congo, because they did not want to accept any aid or help from these other countries in fighting this epidemic. In fact, these countries raised something like 1.3 or several billion dollars, 3.7 billion dollars to fight this epidemic, and the Congo has yet to accept it. They're saying, we don't want other countries meddling in our affairs. Now, whether or not that's a good or bad policy by the Congo, I'm not even going to get into, but the point is the Congo, if they're not even willing to accept medical aid from these other countries, saying, let's send doctors or drugs or people to help in the outbreak, if they're not even willing to accept that, are they really going to accept us sending 3,000 American soldiers into their country as if it's nothing? How open to that would any country be? If let's reverse the roles a little bit. Let's say the United States has some crisis and we said, you know what, we don't need aid. We're the richest country in the world. We don't need aid from other countries. We're fine. We don't want you meddling in our affairs. We're going to tough it up and take care of it ourselves. Would we really want the Democratic Republic of the Congo to come in and send 3,000 of their soldiers to come quell violence in Chicago streets as they send their doctors in to take care of our people? How would Americans react to that? I don't think it would go very well.
Wow.
So Grant, that's an extreme situation which probably doesn't do a lot of justice to the scenario. But when you think about it in that context, is the Congo really going to accept our aid? Are they going to? And if they don't accept it, are we going to still try to send it? Are we going to invade the Congo? What are we going to do to force these people to accept our help?
Right.
It's something that the affirmative has to answer, and if they cannot answer, then they cannot win the round, because they have to show that these people are actually willing to change their current position of not accepting aid.
That's good.
Or we could hold them at gunpoint and make them take our medicine. Take my medicine or I'll kill you.
Take your medicine, Congo. We'll
In
see how
fact,
that goes.
speaking of medicine, the UN actually, let me find this exact card. The UN, I believe it was, or maybe the the World Health Organization just obtained 4,000 doses of experimental Ebola vaccine and was preparing for deployment into Congo. Fun fact. That was directly from Reuters.com. But they're already kind of solving for this problem, and that's another fun bonus inherency argument you have right there. But I have one more good, juicy point for you, and this is our third argument. And this is under solvency, and you can tag it as U.S. financial help is needed, but not physical help. So let me just clarify, because I know in the last point I was reading that the WHO doesn't need the U.S. And this is by the UN, which basically, if you sum up the two in words, it's that the US isn't vitally needed, but if we're needed at all, our financial help would be needed, not our physical, boots on the ground help. This is by the UN. Actually, no, this is by James Keaton, who was a reporter for AP News. It says, and I quote, Tedros said that the UN Health Agency mostly needs the United States to continue financial and other support it has provided. He noted that the US and many other developing countries have security guidelines that prevent deployment in conflict-ridden zones like Ebola hit area of eastern Congo. So that's just, then you could say link one, showing that we need financial help. But then this is by Susie Nascotti, who's a CNN reporter. It says, and I quote, a senior White House official confirmed this month that the U.S. government personnel who had been working on ground in Beni had been evacuated to other parts of Congo due to safety concerns. The official said that the situation is being evaluated constantly, and that in the meantime, the key part, the U.S. continues to provide technological and financial assistance to contain the outbreak. So this goes to show that we're already currently, even though boots aren't on the ground anymore, we're still providing technological, which I don't have any deals on what that is, but that's probably medicine, and financial support to help the UN and the World Health Organization and all the other organizations worldwide that are trying to fight this epidemic to help them fight it. And that, according to the UN, is where the US would be needed, if anywhere.
Very interesting. So basically, the issue is getting solved, and they don't really need our help. But if they did need our help, it wouldn't be in the form of actually boots on the ground. And then even if we did try to help them with boots on the ground, if that was needed, the country probably wouldn't accept it. So it's a very interesting dynamic, but all in all, it seems like this case is probably not one we'd recommend running. I think that's a fair bet.
Judge, please vote negative. Let's not start another world war.
Let's not start a world war in the middle of Africa by invading the Congo to help people. Go team. Awesome. Okay. And we have a little bit more to cover, but before we do that, Elijah, you have the phrase of the week. The phrase of the week, for those of whom are new here, since this is our introductory episode of the Team Policy Podcast, will be something that we try to cover, a new topic, a concept, an idea, something in debate that we want to help inform our audience about if they don't already know. So the topic this week is the Emory switch or the Emory shift. It can be said either way. Elijah, take it away.
Okay, phrase of the week, Emory switch / shift. You can use either term, switch, shift. Background on this, I became acquainted with the term while reading the CC of SC rules. That's a southeastern sub-league of STOA. Before I went to debate tournament in NC. Shout out to Fayetteville Novice Tournament. It said that it was not allowed, that this tactic was not allowed in that league. This was due to a person whom we shall not name, who used the Emory switch way more than the CC of SC bosses were okay with. She was actually one of my first judges this year. It was then banned from that league, although I think you can still use it in STOA, if I'm right, Christian, right?
I believe it's technically allowed, or it's not prohibited is the standard.
Okay. Essentially, this tactic splits up and switches the order of arguments for the negative team. 1NC usually addresses topicality, inherency, significance, things like that. And rules require minor repairs and counterplans to be presented here. And then normally, 2NC presents disadvantages. You can add some solvency, significance, inherency arguments, but not as much as 1NC, like you front loaded in the 1NC. The switch essentially reverses the order. So 1NC does like a lighter load of arguments like the disadvantages, and then 2NC addresses topicality, inherency, significance, like front loading it. And this forces the 1AR to answer a whole ton of new arguments in a small time frame. They will certainly need a lot of prep time, which they may or may not have. And it's a tactically smart measure for the negative, as the affirmative is more likely to drop arguments once being hit with a barrage of at an inconvenient time for them. But it's not completely ethical because it seeks to, although you may have good arguments, it seeks to catch the affirmative off guard, not to present arguments how they are and how good they are. It seeks to win by having the affirmative drop arguments. That's pretty much it. For affirmative, you want to watch out. If you can see that it's in the 1NC that they're possibly using the Emery switch, you probably want to save as much prep time as you can. That is, if it's allowed in your league. And then for the negative team, I mean, it's a good tactic. I wouldn't recommend it though.
Right. I think the Emery switch or the Emery shift, however you want to call it, while it's an interesting tactic and it's something that affirmatives should be theoretically able to handle, I don't think it's an ethical tactic because the idea behind it is that we want to win by basically throwing so much stuff at the affirmative so late in the game that there's no reasonable way they can respond to it. That's the idea behind it. So it's really an intended tactic. It's a tactic intended to win through cheap debating rather than actually being a good debater, using good arguments, or winning the round the way a debater should. It's designed to force them to lose on some sort of technicality, like a dropped argument, because they just couldn't fit it all in late in the game after they use a lot of their prep time on the first affirmative response, basically. So I don't recommend it. I don't think it's an ethical tactic. Some people will disagree, but I think debaters, if you want to really be a good debater, you should debate by coming up with good arguments and actually engaging the other team rather than just trying to use cheap tactics like the Emery switch.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. I think the last topic for today before we close, I think we were going a little bit long today. We're going to try to play around with timing, but the last topic for today is the case to move the Peace Corps under the CDC administratively. So, Stephen, I believe you had some thoughts on this case.
I do indeed. So, the premise of this case is basically saying that the Peace Corps is not being able to accomplish its job very effectively. So, in an effort to help the Peace Corps be more effective, be more safe, be more educated on medical problems, they as the affirmative team proposes, that the CDC, Center for Disease Control and Prevention, they're not very clear, or at least the team we went up against, on if they would make a new branch or make a new department, but the CDC would take over management of the Peace Corps organization and start training the Peace Corps routinely and the Peace Corps volunteers on how to combat and recognize and treat medical conditions. And they would also propose that this Peace Corps drop any of their duties that they currently do, for example, building bridges or digging wells or building huts or disaster relief, and solely start focusing on medical jobs like giving shots or helping fight typhoid, stuff like that.
Wait, to be clear, they said that they wanted to get rid of all the agricultural and development stuff and just do medical?
Not straight up in their case they said it, but in cross-ex.
Yeah, I believe I believe
Very
if you're very poignant with your questions and cross examination, you can get the other team to basically admit that the Peace Corps would be devoted to health operations instead of the other things. They might try to wiggle out of that. It's really unclear, and I don't think the affirmative team that was running it even really knew what that impact would be themselves for their own case, because one of the big issues with their case was no one with any expertise or any writing any literature on this actually advocates this plan. This plan was entirely cooked up by the affirmative team, who I'm sure they're wonderful people and all,
They're
but
great debaters, great people.
obviously we as students are not credentialed to write on what the federal government should do in these cases. We can use evidence and research and things like that, but we in and of ourselves are not the experts in the room, and we shouldn't pose ourselves as such. And so the team really had no person to fall back on saying we should do this specific thing, and so it was just their own idea. So as a result, they didn't seem to have thought through very well the actual application of it and what that would mean in terms of what the Peace Corps members or workers actually do boots on the ground. Do they provide vaccines? Do they build bridges or schools? Do they educate school children, deliver food? What do they do? And will they do different things under this new management, or will they do the same things but better? Will it be similar but slightly different? They really couldn't answer that.
Right. They did have one in their eyes advocacy argument, and it was some card. I believe it was by the Peace Corps website themselves,
Or
and it
former
was from,
Peace Corps workers, I believe.
It was quoting former Peace Corps workers from like 1967 or 63, and it was an example where the Peace Corps teamed up with the CDC to give a group of their volunteers in African country, I believe, training on how to fight chickenpox or smallpox, a disease in that category. And both of these volunteers were like, yeah, this is a great program. It helped us a ton. We learned a bunch. But if you look deeply into the card, you'll notice nowhere it advocates for the CDC to all of a sudden take on this whole new responsibility of managing the Peace Corps. And you'll even notice, or at least we, through cross-ex in our speeches, pointed out that nowhere in their case do they give details on how the CDC would take over the Peace Corps. And this is, kind of an important little detail, considering the Peace Corps is a massive organization and the CDC is even more of a massive organization. How will the CDC take over the Peace Corps? Will they have to hire new workers to be able to manage this giant organization? Are they going to dump all this workload on another one of their employees? And will that employee probably need more financial compensation for all of this extra work he's doing? All they really had an answer to that is we will use the current funding of the CDC and the current funding of the Peace Corps, and we're just going to combine them all into one big pot of money, and then that will be able to solve all the problems. They didn't give any details on how or who will solve the problem.
So,
That's just one very vagueness point.
Right.
I'm just wondering, is this a squirrel case, or?
I don't think it was intended to be one. I think the
Arguably.
team intended to actually keep running it, but based off the results of the tournament in which we encountered the case, I do not think the team will continue with this case. I don't know if this is something other teams will try. It sounds like the kind of thing that this wouldn't be the first team to do, but I don't think this is going to be a case that a lot of people will be running or winning with.
Okay.
Right, I agree. I feel like it could be a killer case if they had any advocacy for it.
If anyone actually supported it.
Yeah, but we don't mean to throw that team under the bus if they ever listen to it. So they are a really great team. They're great people, great debaters.
Right, they are. It's just
not the best case ever.
Right. We're here to attack ideas, not the people behind it. They're great people.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so again, guys, today we covered the introduction. You won't hear that every week from us at the Team Policy Podcast, but for this first episode, we are going to be experimenting a little bit. We're going to be experimenting as well in the coming weeks, but this first podcast, we really want to hear what you think and try to custom tune our podcast and our tone and everything we do to make it more valuable to you guys. But we covered a little bit about ourselves. Again, my name's Christian. We have Steven and Elijah coming to you from 3 different states, Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. Our goal, again, with this podcast is to provide really valuable content to all of our fellow team policy debaters out there, regardless of whether you're a novice or whether you're a fourth-year debater. We want to hopefully provide value to you. We're recording this on a Wednesday, and we hope to be putting it out on a Sunday. So stay tuned. Every Sunday around 2 o'clock, we're going to be hopefully dropping this on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and maybe some other platforms. We have yet to determine that at the moment. But we went over the blockchain case, converting U.S. aid payments to blockchain, and some of our thoughts on that. We covered the Ebola outbreak in the Congo and whether or not the U.S. federal government should send in 3,000 soldiers to try to respond to that, along with doctors after quelling the violence in theory. We covered the Emery switch or shift, depending on how you want to call it, and some of the issues with that, different views on it. And we covered the Peace Corps, moving it under the management of the CDC.
Credits go to a whole bunch of people. Sound editor for this was Elijah. Guitar intro was created by Bear Studios. Album cover was created by Team Policy Multimedia. If you'd like to send us a brief or a case to evaluate and comment on, or even a flow, don't hesitate. You can email us at teampolicypodcast@gmail.com. Again, that's teampolicypodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you join us next time on the official Team Policy Podcast.